Alright, in the last tutorial we talked about the print statement. In this tutorial we are going to talk about the input function. So let's come over here in Python. I'm going to make a new project, or a new Python file I should call it. I'm going to call it input examples. Let's open that up. Okay, like the print function, the input function is a built-in Python function. It requires a single argument. Okay, so if I go with something like input, if I could spell it, enter a number, it's going to allow me to pause the execution of the program. So if I run this, and it's going to display exactly what was printed in the argument for the function. It's going to say enter a number, and if I say enter 17, it finishes the process because it's the only line of code in the entire program. But where does that information go? Well, the input function is a little bit different than the print function. Whereas the print function did work, this one is more of a return function. So it will do the work and give information back to the program. So we need some place to catch it. So anytime you're writing an input function, you would never write it as a standalone function. You would likely write it as part of an assignment statement, like something like num equals enter input, enter a number, or name equals input, enter a name, anything like that. So if I run this and I enter something like now 17, you're going to see that it finishes, but at least now I have something that I can do with that information. I can print the value of num is, and then again I can go comma num, and you'll see that I can actually start using that information. So if I come in here and I enter 17, now it's going to say that the value of num is 17. If I enter something different, it would print out whatever that different value was. Okay, so that's a pretty valuable piece of information. I can gather all sorts of input if I wish. Let's say I wanted my num and I wanted a name. I could say input enter your name, and then I could say somebody's favorite num is, so on and so forth. So I can do something like this instead of this print statement. I could say something of likes, oops, wrong button. I could say name, comma, favorite value is, and then comma num. So now I've got a couple different things that I can, oops, not debug it, I want to run it. So I want to enter a number, let's say enter 17, and I can enter my name, let's say Brandon, and now it says Brandon's favorite value is 17. Okay, so I'm able to input all sorts of information and work with it. It's a very handy function to work with, but you do have to be careful about what you bring into it. Okay, for instance, let's say I took this information and I'm just going to comment this out for a second so I'm not losing it. Back that cursor all the way up to here. Okay, so let's come down here and we'll actually start writing some new code really quick. Let's say I want two numbers and I want to try to add them together. Well, it should be pretty simple enough. Let's call it something like val1. Value 1 equals input, enter value 1. Okay, and I say value 2 equals input, enter value 2. Okay, so nothing's too crazy. And let's say I come up with another variable called total, and it's equal to value 1 plus value 2. That seems simple enough. And let's say I just want a couple of quick print statements. Let's say something like print the sum of I'll say comma value 1, comma value 2, is, and then I'll say total. Okay, so it should print the sum of, and then whatever's in value 1, and I should say, and value 2, and value 2, and whatever the value of value 2 is the total. So let's run it and see what happens. Let's come up here, run. It's going to say, enter value 1. Okay, I enter a 2. Enter value 2. I enter a 5. Well, now it says the sum is 25. Okay, so it says the sum of 2 and value 2. Instead, let's just say the sum of, to make this a little bit less confusing. Okay, and value 2 is 25. So run that one more time just to see what's happening with a little bit cleaner output. So I enter, say, a 2 again and a 5. And now it says the sum of 2 and 5 is 25, which we all know is incorrect. It should come out to 7. So here's what the input function is actually doing. It's grabbing characters from your keyboard and treating them exactly as that, as just characters or strings. And when done with this, this is a process known as concatenation. When done with strings. Okay. If you don't want this to actually just combine the two words together, value 1 and value 2, because that's essentially what they are, they're just words, you need to come up with and make these values in some way. So we need to change them to work together. There's a couple different ways of doing that. One, I can keep the code exactly as it is, and I can just add a couple other statements and say something like value 1 equals the integer version of value 1. This int function will simply convert a string to an integer if it's allowed to do so, given that the string is actually convertible to an integer. And I can go value 2 equals the int version of value 2. And if I do that, no longer now am I concatenating, but I'm actually going to be adding these things together. So let's try it one more time. Let's zoom that in a little. And let's call it a 2 plus 5. And now we get the 7 that we want. Okay. Seems like a lot of code, especially through here, to just get some values to sum, to be able to input an integer value. So we actually can shorten this up a little bit if we wish. We don't have to write it all in separate lines of code. I can take some of this stuff and combine it a little bit if I wish. So let's say we do this instead. Okay. So let's get value 1 and value 2 again, because I've already got those variables there. We'll call it value 1 equals the integer version of my input, enter value 1. Okay. And I want the same thing for value 2. The integer version of input value, enter value 2. Okay. So this is me just kind of making a composition of functions here. So essentially what's happening is we always work from the inside of parentheses out, grab the input of value 1, and then whatever it gives us, change it to an integer. Get the input of value 2, and whatever it is, change it to an integer, and whatever you get, store it in these two values. And so you'll notice that this actually runs exactly the way that it's supposed to. Let's try it with two new numbers. Let's say we use a 6 and a 9, and it should print out appropriately the sum of 6 and 9 is 15. Okay. So this is called a casting function. It will take information and change it to some other data type for us. There are several different functions that will do just that. So instead of changing it to an integer, we could change it to, say, a decimal value by using the words float. Okay. And what that'll do is it'll allow us to type in some sort of decimal value instead. So if I come in here, and let's say I wanted to change and add up a 2.5 to a 3.2. Now I'll get the values that I wanted. I wouldn't be able to use the 2.5 and 3.2 if I kept this as an integer value, because these are not integer values. So for instance, if I left it as int, and and tried to do that again, but entered floats. Let's see what happens. 2.5, and it already gives me an error saying that 2.5 is not a base 10 digit with an integer value. So you have to be very careful about the type of information you want to work with. If you're going to be working with decimal information, you want to wrap your input statement in a float function. If you want to work with integer information, you need to wrap your input function in an int function. So it's pretty simple. As far as input goes, you just need to make sure that you use the appropriate functions to work with. If you know you're going to be working with integer values, okay, then use an integer value. If you know you're going to be working with decimals, use a decimal. So for example, 2, 3.5, now it works just fine, and I get a total of 5.5. And that's about it for the input function. Doesn't do a whole lot more than that. It needs an argument that is going to simply be the prompt that you'll see at the console. If you know you're working with strings, leave it as is. If you know you're going to be working with numbers, wrap it in another function that will convert the information that you type in to a digit that you can work with. And that's all there is to it, guys. Outside of that, it's just a matter of arithmetic. All right, thank you.